The Shelter. By Matthew Bissonnette. "Come on, Christine," yelled Perry as he stood before the open iron door of the shelter one chilly night. Perry Masterson, a man in his mid-40s with copper hair and in good shape, had built the shelter several years before. In this nameless suburb of America during the early 60s, many men had seen fit to build a bomb shelter as if to somehow ease the constant fear of nuclear annihilation. The homes of the suburbs were all identical, bland houses behind which was a backyard. There were already several shelters behind some of the homes. But Perry prided himself on always making the neighbors envious. In a small fenced-in backyard was an old willow tree which swayed limply in the night breeze. Beneath it was a shelter which looked like a cement cube rising out of the ground with the iron door on its front. Perry, in his shirt and tie, stood at the open threshold of the shelter and looked to his approaching wife. Christine, also in her mid-40s, was a woman who had put on a few pounds but still was attractive despite her plump appearance. She had blonde hair down to her shoulders and always had on a rather fashionable sweater and skirt. She now walked towards her husband and the shelter. She said, "I think you are overreacting, Perry." He looked at her with his utter seriousness betrayed by his expression. "We can talk once we are inside." She frowned as she said, "We can barely stand living under the same roof lately. Think being locked up together in your shelter is going to be pleasant for either of us?" Perry took a moment then said, "Because it is an emergency, we have to try and be civil. Now, can we just get inside?" She waited a moment then walked past him and entered the shelter. Perry took a deep breath and closed the door. The somewhat bland cement bunker lay beneath a glittering sky of stars. The inside of the shelter was spacious, a large area with cement walls and 2 cots to either side of the room. Along the walls were racks, either stocked with food or for tools and equipment. There was a table in the middle of the shelter, on which was a radio that was now off. And over the room was a lamp. Perry lay on one cot and looked at the ceiling. Christine sat on the edge of her bed and was looking at him. He seemed to try and avoid watching her, and just lay silently. "We have to talk about it, Perry." He did not look at her as he replied, "Maybe this is not the best time." Christine sighed then said, "A lot of people get divorced." Perry then looked at her and seemed somewhat upset. "I know you have given up on our marriage. So sue me for thinking there is something there worth salvaging." "Fine, keep telling yourself that, Perry," he said. "We can talk about it in the morning. Let's just get some sleep." She then lay on her cot and looked at the ceiling as Perry did. There was silence between them. Later that evening, Perry lay awake in his cot. The interior of the shelter was bathed in the soft glow of the light hanging from the ceiling. Like many nights, he just lay awake and watched his wife sleep as he did that night in the shelter. There was an unpleasant feeling in his gut, and he just looked at her and feared what the future was to bring. Inside the shelter, there was no way to tell it was early in the morning since the world beyond its cement walls was given no way to make itself known since there was no window. A clock on the wall showed though that it was around noon. Perry and Christine sat at the table in the center of the room and ate from 2 bowls of beans silently. She looked at him and it seemed he tried to avoid looking back. Finally she asked, "Why is this any worse than all the other times during this business with the Russians that you were convinced the world was about to end?" Perry did not look at her as he replied, "With missiles in Cuba, the world could end in less than half an hour." "Perry, look at me." He took a moment then faced her. He was frowning and seemed somehow saddened. "What, Christine?" "I'm tired of living like the world is going to end next year, or next month or a second from now. I'm tired of being afraid, and I really don't want to spend my life like this." Perry again looked away from her. "What you are saying is that you don't want to spend your life with me." Christine frowned and seemed offended. "You are putting words in my mouth." "I never said that." Perry looked at her, and seemed somewhat angered. "Then why do you want a divorce?" She looked down at her bowl, and she talked louder as she said, I still love the Perry who wrote to me almost every week while he was in the Pacific during the war, but I would rather be dead than be his wife. Ever since we got married, I do nothing but clean his home, entertain his friends from work, buy his groceries and make the same goddamn meal he likes me to make every Monday night when he gets home from work. Perry then seemed expressionless and just looked at her. It seemed she was about to cry when she suddenly got up. She then walked slowly towards the large iron door. Perry asked, "Where are you going?" Christine composed herself and turned to him just as she turned the large wheel on the door that opened it. "I can't talk to you, Perry." "Well, I talk but you don't listen." But then she tried harder to turn the wheel. Perry noticed her struggling to open the door. "What's wrong?" "It won't open." Perry got up from his chair and stood beside her at the threshold of the door. He tried to turn the wheel but it was stuck. He looked at her. "We might be stuck in here." She was frowning. "Perry, this better not be some sick joke." Perry sighed then explained, "When I paid for the shelter, I got the door at a discount because it had a defective latch." "What are you saying?" "Somebody," he said, "has to open the door from the outside." She then laughed briefly. Perry tried to save some money by buying a defective door. He then looked at her beside him. "I was hoping to never have to use this shelter." "You find this funny?" She frowned and looked away. "Sorry." "How long could we be in here?" He looked to the door. "If I'm not in the office tomorrow, Bob from the agency will check on us. How about we just don't say anything till tomorrow, and we go our separate ways?" She seemed somewhat taken aback. "You will agree to a divorce?" He walked away from her and sat at the table. He said, "You are not happy being my wife. If you are not happy then I guess it is over. I just want to end it before you find someone who can make you happy. We can talk about it, Perry. Please, could we just not talk till tomorrow?" Christine then walked back to the table and sat at it. She then resumed eating in silence. Perry took a moment to collect himself and resumed eating as well. They both ate in silence as they looked at each other. They had spent the whole day laying in their cots across from each other as big band music filled the shelter from the radio on the table. Occasionally the music would be interrupted when news concerning the situation involving Cuba would be given to the public. Outside the shelter, the sun set over the somewhat bland construct of concrete. Once the music resumed, hours of silence was interrupted when Christine looked at him and asked, "Do you really think they'll do it this time? Kill us all?" Perry looked at the ceiling. "They might as well." She was looking at him. "What are you talking about?" Perry sounded saddened as he explained, "The new guy running the agency, Mitch Kaiser. He is not making a secret of the fact that he is letting me go for poor sales." She waited a moment then asked, "Why did you not tell me?" He looked at her, "Because I thought it would be another reason for you to leave me." "Perry," she replied, "we both know how it is like being broke, we both grew up during the Great Depression." Perry said, "That is why I have to let you go. I should have known. I can take care of you." Christine then looked at the ceiling. "The year before the war, when we first got together, we used to have to take care of each other. And I was a lot happier than I am now and we had nothing. But I gave you a good life, Christine, didn't I?" "It was your life, Perry, I really did not have one of my own." He looked at her. "Why are you not happy?" She looked at him as well. "All my friends are your friends' wives. We actually get together every Tuesday night while our husbands play poker and talk about Tupperware. It is really not a fulfilling existence for me." Perry looked at the ceiling again and said flatly, "So, talking about Tupperware every Tuesday night is not a fulfilling life for you?" She waited a moment then laughed. "Still glad you have a sense of humor." There was silence for a while as she looked at him. It was broken when she asked, "Why do you watch me sleep, Perry?" Perry looked at her. "Just to remember what keeps me going. I do that when things get rough, when I worry I can't take care of you." "I know, She said, "You have done that ever since we started living under the same roof. But you have not done that in years. I just never knew why you did it." Perry told her, "In the war, during Iwo Jima, I was scared. The only thing that kept me going was that after that I could be a man you would be proud of, a man you need her a lot more than she needed him. When things get rough, I just have to remind myself of what keeps me going." She just looked at him silently. He then said, "I want you to be happy, Christine, please believe that much. I owe you that much after all the good years you have given me." Christine took a moment, then said, "If that is your attempt to make me feel guilty, Perry," he interrupted her. "No, I have to let you go. Besides, all my debts are in my name. You'll get a fresh start. If you stay with me, you'll be in debt up to your eyeballs. You can work. You made shells in a munitions factory during the war. That does look good on a resume, Perry." He momentarily looked at her, then said, "I love you, Christine, but I have to admit it is over." "Perry, maybe we should," he interrupted her again and raised his voice. "Can we just not talk? I can talk about us ending. It might be easy for you, but it is killing me. It kills me that you hate being my wife, it kills me that us being over does not seem that big to you, and it kills me that in the end we both would have better been off with someone else. Now, can we just say nothing till Bob lets us out tomorrow?" She nodded and they both looked at the ceiling as the day dragged on. It was a cool evening as a carpet of stars glittered over the shelter beneath it in the backyard of that bland suburban home. A wind blew gently across the land and the willow tree swayed limply in the breeze. Inside, Perry was awake, but for the first night in a long time he did not watch Christine sleep. He just looked at the ceiling. In the soft dim glow of the light which illuminated the interior of the shelter, he was unaware that she was looking at him. She said, "Perry." He looked at her. "What, Christine?" "I have a deal." "What deal?" "If you let me work, have my own life and my own friends, and help with the house cleaning, then maybe we could give this a second chance." "And sorry." "I agree, Christine, but why did you apologize?" She smiled. "Maybe I give up on us too easily." He looked at her and was grinning. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you in my life." He then looked away. "Though when Mitches lets me go soon, guess I'll have to be the one who talks about Tupperware on Tuesday nights." They both laughed and were looking at each other. He then said, "It has been a while since we were together." She nodded. "I thought you would never ask." He got up and slowly walked across the room. They both lay on her cot as he kissed her and she began to unbutton her sweater. The next day. It was a warm day that afternoon as the man knocked on the iron door to the shelter as it sat under a cloudless, perfectly blue sky. The man, Bob, was in a suit and seemed older, who had dark, slicked back hair. He knocked again when he then turned the wheel mechanism. The door opened a crack and Bob looked inside. "Anybody home?" Then Perry appeared in the doorway and looked at him as he grinned, his shirt unbuttoned. "What, Bob?" "Well, I figured you would be in your shelter. And since you told me about the door, I figured out what happened when you were not in work today." "Mitch blew a gasket." Perry said, "Tell Mitch tomorrow I quit." "And Bob, one more thing." "What?" "Can you come back tomorrow and open the door?" "Still scared about the Cuba situation?" "No," Perry said, "spending some alone time with my wife so we can figure out where to go from here." Perry then closed the door. Bob looked at the door for a moment, then said something as he walked away. "Funny," Perry said, "his marriage was on the rocks lately." As the man walked away, the concrete shelter sat beneath a perfectly blue sky beneath the old willow tree, and inside a couple talked. Shut off from the entire world beyond its walls.